Karen sent fake HOA police to arrest U.S. Army Colonel, but Pentagons showed her no mercy. It started with fake fines, fake violations, and fake complaints. Then one day they showed up at his door, claiming he was under arrest for violating HOA rules. But they never knew they were dealing with a U.S. Army colonel. This was more than just a simple case of harassment. It was a calculated attempt to intimidate and control. Behind the scenes, a complex web of deceit and corruption was unfolding, orchestrated by a woman named Karen, who had become notorious for her aggressive tactics as the leader of the local homeowners association. Karen and her accomplices, posing as law enforcement, had been disturbing the peace in the neighborhood for months. They would show up unannounced, issuing threats and fines to anyone who dared to question their authority. The residents lived in fear, unsure of how to stand up against these fake officers who seemed to operate above the law. Karen's actions had created a climate of fear and mistrust, where neighbors were pitted against each other, and the community was torn apart by her relentless pursuit of power. But little did Karen know, she had just crossed paths with someone who would not back down. The U.S. Army colonel, a man of honor and integrity, had faced down enemies on the battlefield, but nothing could have prepared him for the cunning and ruthlessness of this HOA leader. As the stakes escalated, the colonel found himself in a battle for justice, not just for himself, but for the entire community. In this gripping true story, we explore the extraordinary tale of how a U.S. Army colonel outsmarted a fraudulent HOA leader and brought her to justice, highlighting themes of courage, deception, and the pursuit of justice. It's a story that will leave you on the edge of your seat, wondering how far some people will go to abuse their power and how others will fight back against all odds. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from in the comment section. And don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more of these gripping stories. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt powerless against an authority figure? How would you react? Meet the U.S. Army colonel, a decorated veteran known for his bravery and integrity. He had recently moved into a new neighborhood, unaware of the challenges that awaited him. This quiet suburban community seemed idyllic at first glance, with manicured lawns and friendly faces. However, beneath the surface, a complex web of corruption and deceit was unfolding, orchestrated by the local homeowners association, HOA leader, Karen. Karen was notorious for her aggressive tactics and selective enforcement of community rules. She had already created tension among residents who lived in fear of her wrath. Her actions were not just about maintaining community standards, they were about exerting control and power over those around her. The HOA, which was supposed to be a beneficial entity for maintaining property values and community harmony, had become a tool for Karen's personal vendettas. The colonel, a man of honor and integrity, had faced down enemies on the battlefield, but nothing could have prepared him for the cunning and ruthlessness of this HOA leader. He had recently received a series of fake violation notices and fines from Karen, despite his property being in full compliance with all regulations. These notices were not just a minor annoyance, they were a calculated attempt to intimidate and control. The colonel began to notice that he was not the only one being targeted. Karen and her accomplices, posing as law enforcement, had been disturbing the peace in the neighborhood for months. They would show up unannounced, issuing threats and fines to anyone who dared to question their authority. The residents lived in fear, unsure of how to stand up against these fake officers who seemed to operate above the law. As the colonel delved deeper into the situation, he discovered that Karen's actions were not just about enforcing HOA rules. They were about manipulating and exploiting the community for personal gain. She had been using the HOA to bully residents into compliance, often targeting those who were most vulnerable. The colonel realized that he had to act, not just to defend his own home, but to protect his neighbors from Karen's tyranny. The conflict between the colonel and Karen was about to escalate into a full-blown battle. The colonel, determined to expose Karen's deceit and bring her to justice, began to gather evidence and build a case against her. Little did Karen know she had just crossed paths with someone who would not back down. It's interesting how quickly things can turn sour in what seems like a perfect community. But what happens when the people in power start abusing their authority? How far would you go to defend your home against unjust accusations? Would you stand up against corruption even if it means facing off against those who seem to hold all the power? Let's continue this story and see how the Colonel's bravery and strategic thinking ultimately led to Karen's downfall. How far would you go to defend your home against unjust accusations? As the conflict between the Colonel and Karen reached its boiling point, the Colonel decided to take a bold step. Pretending to be intimidated by Karen's threats, he agreed to a hearing with her, supposedly to resolve the fake violations and fine. Unbeknownst to Karen, however, the Colonel had secretly arranged with the Pentagon to send a team of officers to intervene. This was not just a simple setup. It was a carefully planned operation designed to expose Karen's deceit and bring her to justice. The day of the hearing arrived, and Karen, confident in her power, showed up with her fake police officers. They were there to arrest the Colonel, or so they thought. As they approached the Colonel's home, they were met with an unexpected surprise. Just as they attempted to take the Colonel into custody, the Pentagon's team arrived on the scene. These were not just any officers. They were highly trained and authorized to handle situations like this. The confrontation was intense. Karen and her accomplices were caught off guard, unsure of how to react as the real authorities closed in. The Pentagon's team quickly took control of the situation, arresting Karen and her fake officers on the spot. The Colonel's bravery and strategic planning had outmaneuvered her, exposing her fraudulent activities to the authorities and bringing an end to her reign of terror in the neighborhood. As the news of Karen's arrest spread, the community began to breathe a sigh of relief. For the first time in months, they felt safe again, knowing that the person responsible for their fear and anxiety was finally being held accountable. The Colonel's actions had not only saved him, but it also brought justice to his community. But the story doesn't end there. Karen's arrest was just the beginning of a long and complex legal process. She faced multiple charges, including fraud, impersonation, and harassment. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and as the trial progressed, it became clear that she would face severe consequences for her actions. The courtroom drama was intense, with Karen's defense team trying to downplay her role in the scheme. However, the prosecution presented a strong case, highlighting the extent of her deceit and the harm she had caused to the community. In the end, justice prevailed, and Karen was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her crimes. It's fascinating how quickly power can corrupt and how far some people will go to maintain their grip on others. But it's equally inspiring to see how courage and determination can lead to justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Now, let's take a moment to think about this. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation where you had to outsmart someone who was trying to deceive you? Would you stand up against corruption, even if it means facing off against those who seem to hold all the power? What would you do if you found yourself in a situation where you had to outsmart someone who was trying to deceive you? As the dust settled, Karen faced the full weight of her actions. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud and impersonation, her crimes laid bare for all to see. Her actions had not only targeted the U.S. Army colonel, but it also affected many other innocent residents who had lived in fear of her tyranny. The community, once divided by her tactics, now came together to support each other and celebrate the justice that had been served. The aftermath of Karen's arrest and conviction was a time of healing and reflection for the community. Residents who had been bullied and intimidated by Karen began to speak out, sharing their stories and finding solace in knowing they were not alone. The colonel, who had once been the target of her deceit, became a hero in the eyes of his neighbors. His bravery and strategic thinking had not only saved him, but had also brought peace back to the community. This story highlights the importance of standing up against corruption and the power of community support in seeking justice. It shows us that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for change. The colonel's determination to expose Karen's deceit and bring her to justice serves as a powerful reminder that one person can make a difference. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded of the importance of integrity and accountability. Karen's eventual conviction and 3-year prison sentence served as a stark reminder of the consequences of abusing power. Her actions had caused harm to many, but in the end, justice prevailed. The community learned a valuable lesson from this experience. They realized that vigilance and unity are crucial in preventing corruption and deceit. By standing together and supporting each other, they were able to overcome the fear and intimidation that had once gripped their neighborhood. Now, let's think about this. How can we ensure that our communities remain safe from corruption and deceit? What steps can we take to prevent situations like this from happening in the future? Is it about being more vigilant, supporting each other, or demanding more accountability from those in power? Let's continue this conversation in the comments below. Share your thoughts on how we can build safer, more just communities for everyone. How can we ensure that our communities remain safe from corruption and deceit? As we conclude this extraordinary story, we are reminded of the power of courage and determination in the face of adversity. The U.S. Army colonel's bravery and strategic thinking not only saved him from Karen's deceitful tactics, but also brought justice to his community. His story serves as a beacon of hope for those facing similar challenges, showing us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way forward. This tale of deception and justice highlights several important lessons. It teaches us about the importance of standing up against corruption and the power of community support in seeking justice. It also reminds us that integrity and accountability are essential in maintaining trust and fairness in our communities. Now, we invite you to share your own stories of overcoming adversity. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand up against injustice or deceit? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's build a community that supports and uplifts each other. Moreover, we encourage you to support efforts that promote transparency and accountability in your communities. Whether it's advocating for better governance, reporting corruption, or simply being a voice for those who are silenced, every action counts. Together, we can create safer, more just environments for everyone. As we reflect on this story, let's ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn from this story about courage, deception, and the pursuit of justice? How can we apply these lessons in our own lives and communities? Before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more inspiring stories of courage and resilience. Let's continue this conversation and inspire each other to make a difference. What lessons can we learn from this story about courage, deception, and the pursuit of justice?